there are loads of very well-known, seemingly quite wealthy corporations that have gone extinct. Now, these big things go bust all the time. The latest, at the time that we're having this discussion, the closest big failure that hit the news was WeWork, the shared office space. They have gone under in the United States, but not in the rest of the world. So the UK part of the company is still up and running, and that's why you see their buildings around London. And no, the company were insolvent, but the IP got bought by somebody else, and their website is running again, but not the physical shops. Today, what happens when a business goes bust, and then there are some things that can survive. So you might still see some of their IP, and you might still see the logo and things, but it will not be the same company behind it. Usually we associate the company with its intellectual property, its trademarks and stuff like that. That makes it recognizable. But quite often, some of the IP will survive and then it's taken over by another company. An example is Habitat. You remember Habitat? They had various stores around London, and it was furniture and things like this. So it was like an upmarket version of IKEA. Exactly the same stuff, but they had assembled it already before they gave it to you. And you paid like a kind of 60% markup. But anyhow, Habitat was fairly well known and fairly well established. It went under quite some time ago, but you will find some of the branded items in other shops. It's because some other companies have bought the IP, have bought some of the design rights, and they continue to produce some of these things, and now you find them in other places. Electrical retailers are normal victims of modern business practices. There used to be various electrical retailers on the British High Street and various mobile phone shops. Almost all of them are gone. There are many dodgy stores, like W.H. Smith's is my personal favorite because it looked horrible when I got to this country more than 20 years ago. And it still looks exactly the same. Like overpriced stuff you could get anywhere else, displayed in horrible, badly lit, crammed, dingy buildings surrounded by school kids who steal stuff. It just blows your mind that this thing's still there. But anyhow, all the electrical retailers have disappeared. There used to be carries that sold various types of electricals, from computers all the way to kind of home white goods and so on. There used to be Comet. There used to be Dixon's. You remember Dixon's? Carries is still around. So it was Dixon's, PC World, that all of these consolidated. They kept buying each other. I think the only one left, in fact, is Carries, because they bought everybody else or whatever was left of everybody else. Sometimes this is consolidating brands without making a great change to the corporate arrangements behind them. But very often, the corporate will have failed, and then either it completely disappears or the bits get bought off. And don't forget that because corporate entities are set up in particular jurisdictions, it could be that the brand is global, but it's the local impression of that brand that has gone under. There were the supermarkets, there were Woolworths and stuff like that. They closed in the UK. They continued in other places. So you might come across, as you're kind of going in other countries, you come across something that used to exist here and your parents used to take you when you were kids, and you're like, oh my God, this thing's still here. Yeah, because the American version of it was fine. It's just the British version that didn't make it. Yeah, because that's precisely trying to figure out what we mean by insolvency is the main part of the discussion we're having today. So we've got all these things that, they, especially the companies that have got a retail presence, they exist and we see them and they're kind of foregrounded in our experience as consumers, and then they're gone. Now, why are they gone? Most of the time, they're gone because somebody made a mistake. It's quite possible that as businesses try to evolve, they invest in the wrong thing, or they try to get a great deal of debt to overcome something that they think is a temporary problem, and it turns out to be something more than a temporary problem. The way business operates, it's usually an unmanageable level of debt that kills companies off. The reason why they accumulate the debt is probably bad business decisions or bad business structures. So a company either is healthy but invests a great deal of money in something that does not work out, then they find themselves unable to repay those debts and they go under. Or a business that has successful operations and has had a successful track record gradually becomes less and less meaningful and starts to kind of bleed its clients up until the point that nobody wants to buy stuff from them anymore. Then they usually try to get loans to get them out of a temporary problem. Then the loans become the problem itself. Usually, the avenue to disaster is taking on, instead of changing the business model or addressing the underlying problem, is taking on debt to keep things running, and then you have an unmanageable problem of debt, and then you fail. If you think about the businesses that we have around us that have gone bust recently, debt has always been the thing that killed them. WeWork, at least the US part, took on incredible amounts of debt because these guys were trying to deal with issues with their cash flow. They needed to rent all these buildings, renovate them on long-term contracts, and then lease them out to people on short-term contracts. This means that they needed to borrow a great deal of money and make all this capital investment to be able to operate, and then they were having an incoming trickle of funds. So this needs to be balanced very carefully because, of course, you need to have the clients that you're eventually selling to, but you need to match your outflow, your debt repayments with your incoming streams of funds. And if these don't match, then your level of debt goes wider and wider and wider. And at some point, people ask for their money back and you realize you don't have it. So this is what happened with WeWork. But of course, they were hugely affected by the lockdown. I mean, what's the point of having rental office spaces if the country's in lockdown and nobody's allowed to leave their house? Nobody's going to go rent things. But you still have to pay rent to the buildings that you already have. Other businesses like Carillion, for instance, that was like a huge construction company, again, huge amounts of debt. They don't want the press to know usually because that affects share price. The companies that are listed in the stock market, they want to maintain their share price stable for a variety of reasons. As we're probably going to see in the context of other presentations, as your shares are getting traded in the stock market, you as a company do not get additional funds. You only get the money the first time that you sold the shares. Then people are selling to each other. Right? But if your share price drops significantly, this isn't great because the company still has some of its own shares, so the value of its own assets goes down, and that looks bad on the accountancy books. Also, some of the employees might be paid and rewarded in shares, so the value of their income goes down. Plus, the overall perception of the company is not positive. So for publicly listed corporations, bad press is something that they really try to avoid because they're concerned about the immediate impact this is going to have on share price. If a company is not listed in the stock market, then negative press is never great. If you're exposed to retail, it might put off your customers, for instance, but it's not the end of the world necessarily. If you're an industry business, so your model is business to business selling, and you're a private limited company and you're not in a stock market, then maybe some adverse press might not be the end of the world. But nobody likes negative stories coming out. That's why the kind of traditional thing that you see in the movies, every time something kind of goes off the rails with the businesses to try and keep it as confidential as possible. Yeah. So it's always a good idea to keep things confidential, but it doesn't have the same amount of influence at any level, at every level for every type of business. Companies that had taken on too much debt that failed, I mean, we mentioned WeWork, we mentioned Carillion was a big construction business that went under and had significant consequences here. a lot of travel companies have gone under because they were in trouble both before and significantly after the pandemic. They were borrowing a great deal of money. And again, borrowing money in itself is not a problem, but how you borrow money and how this fits into your income inflows and outflows, this is what makes the difference. It's possible that you have a very profitable business, but you need to have a great deal of cash to be able to do stuff. So if you're a travel company, you need to renew licenses every year. These licenses cost a great deal of money. It could be that you have to pay for those licenses before your clients have paid you for the services that you offered. If people are paying a deposit to go on holiday, they will pay the balance on that deposit closer to the time of travel. So if everybody is booking the summer holidays in January and pays like a 10% deposit, and then they pay the rest of the money in May to go on holiday in July, then the company knows that it's got a great deal of incoming money in May, but it still has a great deal of expenditure now. If they haven't saved the money from the previous year, they will need to borrow money to be able to keep operating till they get the cash flow coming in. Because the banks, we're talking about commercial businesses here, we're not talking about banks. Banks are controlled in how much money they have aside, how much money they make out as loans through different systems of regulation. And so long as they keep within the boundaries that the regulator has set, then they're considered to be safe to operate. So we're not worried about this. Plus, the banks are not running business with their own money. The banks are there to kind of funnel other people's money to allow them to do their business. The banks are not, they have a model of incoming and outgoing funds, and the regulator determines how much they need to keep aside for security, but they're not in fact betting their own money. Yeah? Once the problem hits, it could hit because the incoming and outgoing cash has become unbalanced. It could hit because the level of debt has gotten too high and the repayments of that debt is too high. It could simply come from business reasons, commercial reasons. You're selling a product that nobody wants to buy anymore. There are plenty of those, right? Or you're an electrical retailer that because you have shops on the high street and employees there and you need to stock things close by, you've got enormous expenses. So you can never offer the same prices as an online retailer that their warehouse is in some random place in Scotland and everything happens online. So the model is very, very different. So it's extremely difficult to compete if you are a physical shop with somebody who's selling the same stuff online. The online stuff is likely to be a lot cheaper. I mean, if their distribution network is effective, or it could be that you're simply selling something nobody wants. Who buys overhead projectors? What you gonna need overhead projectors for? Right? So look, in your average lecture theater, you got machines that we used to kind of project things on the walls or whatever, or put a set of slides and have them up on the wall. We don't need those anymore. We've got screens everywhere. So either you innovate and build something new that is relevant to the way people live now and something that the customers might want to buy, or you're going to go out of business. So the world might have changed around you. Your customers may no longer be there because nobody buys that stuff. You could have invested in the wrong thing and you spend a great deal of money and that ruined your business. You could simply have taken on too much debt, either because you were trying to invest in something or because you tried to get over a temporary difficulty and then you cannot service your debt. These are the business reasons why businesses get in trouble, but it is not the legal pathway for a company to shut down. The legal pathway is rather more mundane. What happens is that one of your creditors turns up and says, you owe me money, I would like you to pay that money. If your response is, I'm sorry, I cannot pay you because I don't have enough money, then we have a situation. I'm not talking about the situation where you dispute the invoice. It's not like somebody turns up and says, you owe me £1,000, and your response is, who the hell are you? I mean, I don't know you. We don't have anything to do together. I don't owe you anything. We're talking about a situation where you acknowledge the claim, but you also acknowledge a temporary inability to meet that demand. If you owe somebody we're not talking about £50 here, but if you owe somebody a slightly more significant amount, not huge, if you go through the Insolvency Act, it says £750 is where they set the limit. I mean, it can fluctuate depending on how the legislation is set up, but currently it's there. If you have an invoice that you need to pay that is in excess of £750, and your response to that demand is, I'm sorry, I don't have enough cash to be able to pay you now, then the person that is owed this money can go to the court and can start a process that could end up in your insolvency. So they go to court and they file appropriate documentation for this unpaid demand. The court will then appoint, well, once they do some basic checks to make sure that this is not an error. Because of course, if you were paying something with a standing order and you change bank account or something went wrong with the bank and they didn't pay out, they're not going to shut down your business because the payment is delayed for a technical reason. Once it is determined that the invoice has not been paid because of an inability to meet that payment, then you're beginning with a process that starts with the appointment of administrators. So the court will bring in people to have a look at your company and figure out what's going wrong with your finances. This has a series of very important consequences, because from the moment that the court appoints administrators, these are court-appointed officers, and they take over the running of the company. So the board of directors is no longer running the show. It's the court-appointed officials that are running the show. What they will do, they will have a look at the company accounts to see how much money is available and what this money is supposed to be doing. If you think back to the presentation that we had about accounts and how these accounts are represented in the balance sheets, the profit and loss statements, they will have a look at that stuff. They will have a look at current assets against current liabilities, and also long-term assets against long-term liabilities. If your short-term liabilities exceed your short-term assets, it means you cannot make payments. So then the question becomes, is there enough residual wealth in your company, in your long-term assets, to try and turn this around? So your company is still operating. The company is not dead yet. But crucially, they're going to have to think, where is the value placed in this company? And if it is placed in kind of long-term stuff, can this be turned into cash to help you cover your liabilities right now? It could be that the company has enough wealth that can be changed and turned around in a way that it addresses a temporary liquidity problem. If that is the case, then they will make those changes. Once the company is restored to financial health, then the administrators can leave and the company can continue. Most of the time, they will find something more significantly wrong with the company, so they will need to sell off something important. That's why you will read in the financial press that once administrators have been appointed to look at the corporation, then they look at things that are significant. Shutting down stores, selling significant assets. If you have a significant retail presence and you have a lot of shops around the place, maybe they're going to close the shops that are loss-making and just keep a few that are making a profit in order to turn the company around. It could be that they sell parts of the business itself. If the business has got like a kind of physical arm and an online arm and something else, or a part of it is services, part of it is goods, maybe they're going to determine which one is actually making money, which one is making loss, and get rid of the one that's making loss. That could be a way to kind of restructure the business looking into the future. At that point, as I said, the company is still operating. If the problem is beyond the temporary, then we're looking at other situations. Because if the problem cannot be fixed by reorganizing the business, dealing with expenses, dealing with costs, liquidating some of the assets to generate cash. If that is not fixing the problem, then the company shifts to another process and begins the process of shutting down. So at that point, the administration turns into liquidation, which means that the company now is not going to survive and everything is beginning to kind of come apart. In that case, the board of directors is not returning. So the directors were sort of in the background while the administrators were having a look at what the situation is. If the situation cannot be turned around and the company cannot be restored to operations, then the board of directors is gone. If it turns into a liquidation situation, then the officers that have been appointed now have a different job. Their job is not to check whether the company could survive. Their job now is to check that enough value can be generated out of what the company has to compensate the creditors. In any event, once you begin such a process, the focus has shifted to the creditors as opposed to the shareholders. You will remember from what we've seen in the past that the company is run in the interests of the shareholders. So returning profits to the shareholders is the primary goal of having a corporation. But once you get into this sort of trouble, that the company can no longer pay its creditors, the focus shifts to preserving money for the creditors. Nobody cares about the shareholders. If you graduate from an administration that might have the company surviving to a liquidation, which means the company is not surviving, then the shareholders are out. So the shareholders both their interests are irrelevant anymore. What they might want to do doesn't matter to anybody. The only thing that matters is the creditors. And the shareholders are not getting anything back. So there's no extra value that they're going to get out of the company. They effectively hold a bunch of shares that are now worthless because the company is going to shut down. They're not allowed to sell them or do anything with them. They lost the amount of money that they put into the company to begin with. So whatever money you paid to purchase the shares, if the company is going insolvent, these shares are worth nothing and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, this might sound harsh, but remember that that's the whole point of this organization. If you participate in a company, a private limited company, the whole point of your participation was that you have unlimited potential to benefit when the company is doing well, but if the company does poorly, the maximum you can lose is the amount of money you paid to purchase the shares. Well, now things have gone wrong, so the worst thing is happening to you, but it could get a lot worse. If you were not in a private limited company, then they might come after your personal money as well to satisfy the creditors. So if you were working for yourself and you didn't have the protection of a corporate entity, if you owe people money, you need to pay that money. Nobody cares if that money is in the drawer that says business or it's in the drawer that says, Tesco money. Having the benefit of limited liability means that they cannot come after your personal drawer, but whatever was in the business drawer is gone. Okay? Now, the important thing now, once you're going through the process of insolvency, so the company is getting liquidated, is to figure out who gets paid and in what order. Because all creditors are not the same. And this is very important. There are loads of people that a corporation might owe money to, even on a small level. You have to pay internet. You have to pay mobile phone bills, right? You have to pay your employees' bills, their salaries. You have to pay national insurance contributions. You have to pay pensions contributions. You have to pay your taxes. You need to refund VAT to the revenue. You have to pay your suppliers who brought you stuff, either stuff that you consume in the running of your business or what are the components of the goods that you're selling. So you could owe a great deal of money to people who are supplying you with products. You might take benefit of various services. You could be using cloud services. You could be using all sorts of stuff that have got a cost. You need to pay for the maintenance of your website. You need to pay your accountants, your lawyers, other types of professional consultancy services that you might have needed. All of these are a long list of liabilities, and it doesn't even include debts that you might have to banks or loans that you've received from other investors and interest that you need to pay on all those loans. So every business that has a significant level, even a small level of turnover, but from the moment that you're having a level of turnover, you will have generated all those liabilities. Now, normally these liabilities aren't a big deal. They're represented in your accounts, so you can see where everything is. They only become a problem once you've run out of money and you cannot pay these people. The people who are running the show now, the liquidators, are going to have to make decisions on who they pay. There needs to be a system and a method that allows them to determine who gets paid first. And all this is built into the law. This is not at the command of the liquidators. So they don't have freedom to make choices. So they cannot say, let's pay the little people first because they might be the worst affected, or let's pay the banks first because the banks look scary. Right? Determining who to pay and when to pay them is all in the process that is built into the law, and your reference for this is the Insolvency Act. So in this domain, if we're discussing company business law and all of that stuff, usually when we were talking about corporate organization, setting things up, and then looking at the rules as to what makes a company operate, we were looking at the Companies Act. Now that we're looking at the failure of the system, we're not looking at the Companies Act primarily. It has some role to play, but not so much. We're looking mostly at the Insolvency Act, which is specifically built for this. Every act of parliament is subject to changes all the time. So if you're looking at the legislation.gov.uk site, it's going to tell you that what it shows you is the act as applicable at. So you look at the screen that says the act as it is currently in force, and that will contain all changes that have been made since. But when you refer to the act, you still refer to the act with the original date when it was passed. Yeah. So in the same way that we talk about the Companies Act of 2006, we talk about this Act of 1986, but clearly we're not looking at an old statute book to take the version of what it was back then. We're looking at what it looks like today after all the amendments have been passed. The amendments are passed by statutory instruments. Is something that happens all the time. Right. So there's a list and there's a process that will tell the liquidators who gets paid first and how to determine between the various types of creditors. Bankrupt is not a term in English law. They go bankrupt in the US. Here, if you say bankrupt is for personal bankruptcy, if an individual cannot pay their debts, then they go bankrupt. But in the corporate domain, it's called insolvency. So, in effect, nobody goes bankrupt in the UK, they go insolvent. If you bought a phone from a mobile phone shop in the high street, and you bought it SIM-free, right? Just a device. And you paid for it in advance, and they said it's going to be here, collect in store, a couple of days. So you paid with your card, fully charged on your card. You go to the shop in a couple of days when they said it's going to be there, and you find that the shop is closed. And they've got a sign saying, sorry, we've gone past. But the phone that you ordered is sitting there on the desk, and you can see it from the window, and it's got your name on it. It's got like a post-it note with your name on it, and it's sitting there on the desk, and you fully paid for it already. Can you get it? No, you're not going to get it, because this is still an asset of the company till they deliver it to you. So what you have is a claim to the phone, but it's not yet your property. Do you think that you're going to be able to get it if you talk to the liquidators, you talk to the offices that are running this and say, it's my phone, it's just there, it's got my money, I don't want anything else from you guys, just give me my phone. You think they're going to give it to you? The owners of the company are gone. So you would want to know, because now there's you and there's a bunch of other people waiting to get stuff. You would like to know how you rank in relation to all the other people, and whether you have a claim to be the first in line to collect it or the last in line. Now, unfortunately, in your case, you're going to be the last one in, because the order is, first, you have the people who are called secure creditors, then you get the people who are called preferential, then anybody who has a floating charge, then anybody who's unsecured, meaning has got no particular claim, which is you, then any interest on any of those debts, and then in the end, if anything's left, the shareholders, but of course, in these cases, there's nothing left for the shareholders. So we need to kind of try and figure out, within that order, who is who, to try and position you, and to give you a sort of estimate as to whether you got any chances of retrieving that phone or not. Secured creditors are the people who run the show, because the court-appointed liquidators are not doing this for fun, they need to get paid. Usually they get accountancy firms to do this. So these people have got bills. So the first thing that gets paid is them, is the expenses of the court, the expenses of the process, the bills of the liquidators themselves. Which makes sense in a way, otherwise you would have nobody running this process. Then you have the people that are holding fixed charges. But look, none of these things mean anything in a normal language sense. All of these things have got specific definitions within this context, right? So don't try and work it out by thinking, what does a fixed charge mean for me? For you, yeah, it's probably the things that come out on a standing order every month, this is exactly the same amount, but this is not what we're talking about. Fixed charges are entries into the company's books that somebody has a claim over a particular asset of the company. And people take these as securities, as security for loans. So a mortgage is a fixed charge. It means that the bank is giving you an amount of money, and that money is secured by the house. So if you don't pay the money, they'll come and take the house. Yeah, the point with the mortgage is you're buying the house, but they're saying that if you don't finish off with the payments, they're going to take it away from you. So if you're renting something, you never had ownership of the asset. For fixed charges, this is a claim over an asset that you own, that they say if you don't keep up with your payments or if you don't satisfy a particular obligation, then they will come and take that particular asset. But the whole trick is precisely this, that the charge is on a particular asset. So if you go, we've gone in the past through looking at corporations on Companies House and the documentation that they've got in there. They have a list of charges registered on the company that you can see on the documents that are in Companies House. So the banks that have taken fixed charges over their assets, this is actually publicly available for everybody to see. Why is it publicly available? Because if you're doing business with them, you would like to know about other people that have got claims over their assets. Because if everything of value that they've got is already taken over by somebody else, in case you get in trouble, then maybe you're thinking if you give money to this company, you've got nothing to secure it against, so maybe it's a bit of a risky thing to give them more money. But a fixed asset is over a specific resource, right? So a fixed asset is going to be over something that you can identify. And this is the particular thing that they're going to come and take away. So you could have a fixed asset over vehicles, over property that they own. If we're talking about movable goods, about specific goods, so they need to be securely identified. It could be all the IT equipment the specific IT equipment that is now in this building. Yeah? And because this is burdensome, you need to go through the process of registering it with Companies House, and once something has a fixed charge on it, the company is not free to sell it, change it, and so on. So if they need to do anything to it, if they want to replace it, if they want to fix it, if they want to do anything, they need to get the consent of the charge holder before they do it. So this is heavy going. It's not done for fun. It's done to secure significant loans. That's the reason why it ranks high in terms of recovery. That's why the fixed charge holders are at the top of the recovery list, because this thing is burdensome enough to do, so they deserve that additional level of protection. So the first people that get paid are the expenses of the liquidation and anybody who has a fixed charge. So if the company has run out of money, has got no cash available, then people come and start taking these things away. Then you have the preferential creditors, which are wages, pension fund obligations, and things that are owed to HMRC, primarily national insurance contributions, VAT redemptions, and income taxes and stuff like that. Now, this has changed. You will see here I had the revenue down in level 4. This has changed recently by legislation, so the revenue has gone up to number 2. I think they realized they were losing too much money because everybody was going bust during the pandemic. So that became an issue for them, and they moved them up. So these are the preferential creditors. It's nice to be a preferential creditor, not as secure as having a fixed charge over an asset that represents your money, but, not a bad deal. After that, you've got the floating charge holders. Now, these are people who have also registered the charge, but there's something different between this and the original charge. Fixed charges are over specific assets. These particular screens or computers, this particular building, or this particular vehicle. Floating charges are on something that belongs to an asset class. So it could be on IT equipment owned by the business, but it doesn't specify which IT equipment. It could be vehicles owned by the business, but it doesn't specify which one. So it's less burdensome. It means that you have a claim over things that belong to a class up to the level that you've set up your charge, but it doesn't need to be a particular thing. If we had a fixed charge to secure £1,000 worth of IT equipment, they would probably have said 3 screens in here. There's 3 TV screens in here, these 3 TV screens, because if you add them together, they make £1,000. These specific TV screens. But if it was a floating charge and it said, we're securing £500 over IT equipment in this room, then it could be when it happened, you would select 1 or 2 of these screens, not all 3 of them, and you don't know which one. So it's more flexible, it's less burdensome, but also because it's less burdensome, it's less secure. How do you determine which particular thing you're picking up? Is when the floating charge crystallizes, and it crystallizes with particular trigger events. So the contract, the information that gets logged into the books of the company will say, we have a floating charge over assets in that category. This entitlement matures if that happens, and at that point we can come in and get the stuff. So the floating charge will crystallize and become something specific when a particular event occurs in the way that it's determined in this documentation. Usually, it's going to be a default situation. Like if the company defaults on its loans and somebody goes to court and begins the process, at that point, the charge crystallizes. Or it could have other triggers. You could say if debt as a percentage of turnover exceeds a certain level, then that's the crystallizing event. It could be anything because this is contractually determined. It will have to do with the performance of the company, or it will have to do with the actions of others, like who starts a process or who has an unpaid claim. But it can be a variety of things within those bands. Is it good to be a floating charge holder? Well, better than other stuff, yeah. The one thing you're trying to avoid is to be an unsecured creditor. An unsecured creditor means that they owe you money, but you've got no special entitlement. So all the suppliers that have got unpaid invoices are unsecured creditors. All the customers that have paid in advance or put down deposits and they're expecting to get something, they are unsecured creditors. You remember the House of Fraser, the shop? They went into insolvency a few years ago. Now, the brand is still there. Some of the shops are still there because some of it got sold along with the IP to somebody else. The original entity, when they went under, they had a lot of customers who had made orders. The orders that had shipped could not be stopped because they were already with the delivery companies. So when they left the main warehouse and they were part of the distribution network, they could not be retrieved. So these made their way to the customer. The ones that hadn't been shipped already, that customers had already paid for, they were part of the insolvency process. The customers were unsecured creditors. The advice to them was claim back through your payments facilitator. Was it your credit card? Was it your bank? Was it PayPal? Did you pay through some other means? It is your bank that will refund you, not the company. People who had gift cards got nothing because unless they could get a charge back through their bank or something for when they purchased the gift card, and if they hadn't purchased it themselves, it became a lot more difficult, they were unsecured creditors, so the gift cards were wiped out. So keep that in mind if you're buying people gift cards. If something happens and the company goes bust, then the gift card is wiped out and you cannot retrieve the money from anywhere. So like a colleague leaves at work and everybody kind of chips in and you get them like a £500 Waitrose gift card. If Waitrose goes bust, that thing's gone because it's not insured anywhere. Yeah. So the people who were in that situation lost a great deal of money because they were unsecured creditors. In my example, if your phone is sitting there in the shop, even though it's got your name on it, ownership of it has not passed to you because you didn't pick it up. So it's in sale of goods, unless there are specific terms, ownership passes on delivery. It hasn't been delivered to you, so it still belongs to the shop. You are an unsecured creditor. You are at the end of this list. After they've paid the fixed charge holders, all the preferentials, and all the floating charge holders, do you think there's going to be anything left to compensate you? You will certainly not get that particular phone that's sitting there. You won't get that, but you won't even get the money back. So when this happened, it happened to our students because there was a phone company called Phones for You that had a shop next to the main building. And a lot of students got phones and stuff from them. It was like a common thing to do. The ones that had bought a contract, like a pay monthly contract that came with the phone, their contract was with the company that gave them, because say you were buying a contract with Vodafone and Vodafone gave you the device and the airtime and all of that stuff. Because the contract was three parties, the student, the shop, and Vodafone agreed to fulfill the terms of the contract and gave people the phone that they had ordered. The people who had ordered stuff SIM-free, just a device from the particular shop, couldn't get it because they were considered to be unsecured creditors. and there was nobody else to help them. So for those people, we said, check with your bank. If you paid by credit card, then by law, on the basis of the Consumer Credit Act, the bank is a third party, is another party in your contract with the supplier. So if the supplier doesn't fulfill the contract, your bank becomes responsible to do so. Therefore, your bank will refund you. If you have a debit card, it's not an obligation by law, but usually they will help you out for contractual reasons. So a lot of people got refunded because they managed to do a charge back on the debit card. So they got the money back. Anybody who bought by PayPal or something, again, contractually, PayPal guarantees the transaction. So if you don't get your item, then they're going to give you back the money because they've got that's part of the deal that you've got with them. Other facilitators might have offered similar things. But the people who, say, paid cash to order the phone, and then they were just waiting for it to be delivered to go pick up in store, and they had no relationship in this transaction with anybody else other than the shop there, they lost out. So the last thing you want to happen is for you to be left as an unsecured creditor, because then you have all the risk of the transaction going wrongly. Could you get insurance? I mean, from a retail point of view, you might. Not so much for goods, but usually for services. If you buy a flight or you buy a holiday package, at some point in what they're selling you will pop up and say, do you want to purchase insurance? This covers your inability to travel, it covers a failure of the supplier or anything like this. Sometimes this is by law. If you buy like an ATOL protected holiday, they will say that ATOL guarantees the supplier's end. So if the company fails, then they will refund you for your holiday. So sometimes this stuff is prepaid and it's part of your package. Some stuff is an opportunity to purchase additionally while you're making this transaction, or sometimes you can protect yourself externally. That's why we buy travel insurance for ourselves that covers all the travel that we have in the year. Or your credit card might offer you travel insurance as a top-up, or your bank account or something like this. But what I'm trying to get to is there are rules within the corporate insolvency system as to who gets what and when, and everybody gets attached a different label, and that label puts them on a priority list. What you need to think about is how do you elevate yourself within that priority list to be at the safest possible point. If you cannot elevate yourself within that list, then try and get some external protection through insurance, contractual obligations by an external provider, consumer credit protection, or something like this. If this is a business-to-business situation, there's something else that you could do. You could, in your contract of sale, separate ownership from possession. Did you guys do anything about the Sale of Goods Act when you were doing contract law? Now, maybe you didn't talk about the law of sales when you were doing contract law. If you had done business law, certainly there were parts about the Sale of Goods Act in there. But in any event, in the Sale of Goods Act, you have the opportunity to separate possession from ownership. Normally, you gain possession or you gain ownership when the goods are delivered to you. But it's not necessary. So you can say you have possession, but ownership belongs to somebody else. That can provide a way out of this situation here. If you deliver the goods to the company and your contract of sale says ownership to those goods passes to the company when the invoice is fully paid off, or perhaps when all the invoices we have together are fully paid off, then they might have physical possession of the goods, but the goods are still yours. What this means is that if the company goes bust and the administrators, liquidators, etc. come in and try to divvy up assets, these assets are not part of the insolvency process because they don't belong to the company, they belong to you. what you also need is to give yourselves the right of access to say that not only till the invoices are paid off, these things belong to me, but also I have the right to access your warehouses to retrieve those if I am unpaid. But that way, you kept yourself out. And this is a cheap way to do it. You don't have to register a fixed charge. You don't have to register a floating charge. You don't have to worry about anything else. If the only thing you're interested in is getting paid for those goods or retrieving those goods, a retention of title, as this is called, is an excellent way to do it. The law has well integrated in this concept. It's not a problem. As I said, it's in the Sale of Goods Act. There's lots of case law that validates the retention of title clauses. One area of difficulty that we had is when the goods have been messed with. The key issue with retaining title is that your goods remain distinct. So if they take them, they put them at the corner of the warehouse away from everything else, and they know which one it is, then it's not a problem to say this thing doesn't belong to the company, it belongs to me. But if what you gave them is generic, you gave them potatoes, and then they emptied them in a big bucket of potatoes, you don't know which one's yours and which ones are the others. In that case, your clause is not going to work. Or if you've got a delivery of, cans of tomatoes, and the packaging is the same for everybody, and they put them in a massive warehouse along with the others, and you cannot identify them anymore, you have a problem. Or if they open these cans and they make sauce out of it, pasta sauce, then they've used them. So again, you lost the right. If your goods are mixed or part of some sort of manufacturing process, or even worse, sold off and turned into money, then it becomes very difficult to trace your ownership into that outcome. So long as they remain distinct, my boxes in their packaging, the way you got them, sitting somewhere separate and identifiable, are mine until you pay me, then that works very well. So that's like a final, not for retail, of course, doesn't work, but it's a final mechanism that you can use to protect yourself and elevate yourself into this order if you want, or even, the best way to play this game is not to be part of the game to begin with. So you remove yourself from that discussion by making sure that the goods that you're interested in were never owned by the company.